You know what makes a story truly scary and engaging? Not because it's elaborately staged or intentionally made to be horrifying, but because it comes from real experiences that happen to very ordinary people around us. Moments that happen suddenly in familiar places, making us realize that if it can happen to them, it can absolutely happen to us. Sounds creepy enough, right? Then follow me. Because what you are about to hear are all true stories sent to me by the owners themselves. And if you have ever experienced anything strange, unusual, or haunting, send your story to the email in the description. Who knows, your story might appear in the next video of the channel. And remember to subscribe to the channel to follow more true stories. Now, let's get started. On Christmas Eve of 2014, the peaceful holiday energy in Nashville, Tennessee, shifted into something tense and unsettling when 50-year-old businessman Carol Warren was found harmed inside his home under disturbing circumstances, and what should have been a night of warmth and celebration turned into a case that shook his community and uncovered the hidden tensions people never expect to see during the holidays. Carol was well known around Nashville, a respected real estate owner with a reputation for kindness, generosity, and loyalty. He worked hard, built a solid life, and was known for helping people who needed a second chance. Friends described him as someone who would quietly support others without expecting anything back. Even though he was financially successful, he kept his lifestyle relatively simple, living alone in a comfortable house in the suburbs where he often hosted holiday dinners for co-workers, family, and close friends. On December 24th, Carol was supposed to attend a Christmas Eve church service and then meet friends for dinner, but he never showed up, which immediately worried the people who knew him best. They called his phone again and again, with no response, and by Christmas morning, when he still had not answered, they drove to his home to check on him. What they found was something they could not easily process. The living room was in complete disarray, decorations knocked over, furniture shifted, and signs of a struggle visible enough to know something serious had happened. Carol was lying on the floor, not moving, clearly injured, and the quiet holiday atmosphere inside that house felt frozen. Investigators arrived quickly and immediately noted that there were no signs of forced entry, nothing broken, no windows tampered with. Nothing to suggest a random person had wandered inside. This pointed toward a troubling possibility that Carol knew whoever came to his door or willingly let them in. Detectives began retracing his last known movements, talking to neighbors and friends, and collecting details about recent events in his life. One neighbor mentioned seeing an unfamiliar dark sedan near Carol's house late on Christmas Eve, something that stood out because the street was normally quiet, especially during winter. That vehicle description would soon become a major clue. As police continued digging into his personal and professional life, they found that Carol had been dealing with tension related to a failed business deal with a former colleague named Eric Matthews. The two had ended their partnership on bad terms, with Matthews expressing resentment over financial disagreements. This instantly made him someone detectives needed to talk to. As forensic teams examined the house, they found small drops of trace evidence near the doorway, and more importantly, they located a knife discarded in a trash can a few blocks away. Although the details were softened for the public, investigators confirmed it held markings, linking it to what happened inside the home. DNA testing revealed two profiles, Carol's and an unidentified individual. Surveillance footage was gathered from nearby homes, and one camera captured a dark sedan similar to the witness description driving away from Carol's home around the time everything occurred. That vehicle was traced back to Eric Matthews, who claimed he was not in the area. However, his timeline shifted several times when detectives pressed him, and pieces of his story no longer lined up. Matthews was a 42-year-old real estate agent known for his inconsistent finances and increasing frustration over the failed deal. Investigators found messages showing he blamed Carol for his financial stress and believed Carol had ruined his future plans. They also found clothing in his home with small stains that matched the trace evidence found near Carol. During the trial that followed, prosecutors argued that Matthews had visited Carol on Christmas Eve, pretending he wanted to talk through their problems, but the conversation escalated, and he ended up harming him during an emotional outburst. The defense tried to claim the evidence was circumstantial and suggested there were other people who might have had issues with Carol, but the digital records, the vehicle footage, the messages, and the forensic findings formed a clear picture. After weeks in court, Matthews was found guilty of causing Carol's death and was sentenced to life in prison without parole, bringing some closure to the people who loved Carol, even though nothing could erase the loss. In the months that followed, Carol's friends and colleagues honored his memory by creating a charity fund in his name, offering housing assistance to families in the Nashville area. His story remains a painful reminder that even during the holidays, when people expect warmth and joy, the hidden struggles between individuals can build into something dangerous. His legacy, though, continues to inspire kindness and support in the community, showing that even in the darkest moments, compassion can still shine through. It was a Sunday, exactly 1 week before Christmas, when I got home from work and found a small package sitting on our front porch, addressed to my dad and wrapped in plain brown paper with the words "Handle with care" written across the top. I was in my last year of high school, working a holiday job so I could buy gifts, and because my shift ended around 2 in the afternoon, I usually got home long before my parents did. That meant the sun was still out when I picked up the box, and noticed right away that it felt strangely heavy for its size. Something about the weight made me think it was an expensive work item, or maybe a piece of equipment he had ordered, because my dad didn't really have hobbies outside his job and he rarely got personal mail. I set the package on the kitchen table and didn't think much of it, expecting he would open it on Christmas morning when all the gifts came out. At least, that was what seemed normal. My mom got home later. Then my dad arrived around 6, noticing the box as soon as he walked into the kitchen. After grabbing coffee and chatting with us, he picked it up and said he might as well open it, since nothing about the wrapping looked festive. There were no bows or tags, no Merry Christmas written anywhere, so he assumed it was work-related. My mom teased him and said if it turned out to be food, he better share, and he laughed before heading upstairs to his office with the package. I remember sitting on the couch flipping through TV channels when I called out asking my mom what time dinner would be ready, and in the middle of that sentence, a loud thud exploded through the house from upstairs, shaking the walls so hard it made both of us freeze. My mom and I met each other in the hallway, instantly alarmed, then ran toward my dad's office. She got to the door first, opened it, and the moment she looked inside, she screamed and backed away. I didn't fully process what I saw in that split second, but I smelled something sharp in the air, the kind of chemical smell that hits you before your brain catches up. I only caught a glimpse, but it was enough to know something terrible had happened, something that left the room in complete chaos, and my dad was no longer responsive. I shut the door without thinking because I knew my mom shouldn't see anymore, and honestly, neither should I. My mind went into this cold, focused mode even though my heart was pounding, and everything in me wanted to break down. My mom was collapsing emotionally, shaking and unable to talk, so I had to get her grounded enough to call for help. All she could do was hand me the phone because she couldn't finish a single sentence. I stepped away from the door trying to describe what little I understood to the operator even though my voice was shaking. It was the worst moment of my life, not just because of how sudden it was, but because even after all these years we still have no idea who sent that package or why. The only strange clue came from how people at his company behaved afterward. He worked for an import and export business in California that operated in both Los Angeles and San Diego. He made them a lot of money, and they treated him well financially, at least in the beginning. They paid for the funeral, made sure insurance came through, and even offered to send my mom and me to Hawaii for a month, which we refused. But the moment we tried to ask what exactly my dad did for them behind the generic job title, they shut down completely. They gave us polite but empty answers, saying his role involved product acquisition, but refused to go into detail. They said they were cooperating with police, but according to the detectives, they only provided the bare minimum information required and nothing else. When officers asked whether my dad's work ever created enemies or if any disputes could have led to someone sending something harmful, the company became vague, almost rehearsed. Their lawyers stepped in quickly and blocked nearly every question. It made no sense how they could be so supportive publicly, yet so closed off privately, unless there was something they didn't want us to know. Investigators later told us quietly that the device had been professionally made and delivered in a way that left almost no trace, which suggested the person behind it was not some random stranger, but someone who had been paid to do a job, and the job was to harm my father. They never found the person who built it. They never identified who ordered it, and no one from the company ever reached out again, except to send routine paperwork. The pain has faded a little with time, and my mom still struggles on certain days, especially around the holidays, but we have learned how to keep moving forward, even though we will never have answers. The hardest part for me has been the resentment, not toward the person who did it because we do not know who that is, but toward the people who understood his professional world better than anyone and still chose silence over honesty. 2 therapists told me resentment can eat you alive, but I do not think that is true. I think the only people who should feel the weight of what happened are the ones who know more than they ever admitted, the ones who let us carry this uncertainty alone. It was a quiet evening just a few days before Christmas, and I was alone in my flat enjoying my first night of Christmas leave, with my dog Max curled up at the foot of the couch. The weather outside was rough, and because my flat was a corner unit, the wind would push against the walls and create this almost cartoonish howling sound that, when you were warm and wrapped in blankets, actually felt comforting. It was around 6, and I was sipping a cup of coffee under a pile of blankets when I heard a knock at my door. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to startle me. Nobody ever knocked directly on my door because the building had an intercom system. If someone was knocking up here, it was almost always a neighbor. I got up, walked down the corridor, and out of curiosity looked through the peephole. Standing there was a man dressed as Father Christmas, with a clipboard in one hand and one of those plastic charity cups in the other. He was wearing the full Santa outfit, red suit, hat, fake silvery beard, all of it, so I couldn't see much of his face. The clipboard and the collection cup made me assume he was a neighbor, doing some holiday charity round. I cracked the door open just an inch, with the chain still secured, and said hi, expecting him to explain what charity he was collecting for. Instead, after taking one innocent-looking step forward and raising the cup, the man suddenly pushed his full weight against the door, as if trying to force it open. His eyes were the only real part of him I could see, and they changed in a split second from friendly to something intense and unsettling. He shoved harder, and the door chain screeched under the pressure. Panic raced up my spine as he pushed again, the hinges rattling. His hand slipped through the gap, and his fingers clawed at the chain. Everything blurred together as I tried to hold the door shut, but he was stronger than I expected. With one final shove, the chain snapped, and the door flew open, sending me stumbling backward. The moment he stepped inside, the smell of alcohol hit me. I screamed and backed away, but my flat was tiny, and there was nowhere to run. My back hit the wall, and he pinned me with his arms, his breath hot and sour as he muttered something I couldn't understand. Then, slicing through the chaos, came a low growl. Max leapt off the couch with a force I had never seen in him. He was always sweet and gentle, the kind of dog who loved everyone, but in that moment he became something fierce and protective. He launched himself at the man and clamped onto the arm, holding me. The man yelled and loosened his grip as he tried to shake Max off. I saw the red suit tear and the man stumble back, hitting the wall while Max held on, growling with this raw determination that didn't match his usual calm nature. The man swung at Max in panic, trying to pry him off, but Max only pushed harder, forcing him farther away from me and giving me just enough time to scramble back to my feet. My legs were shaking so badly I almost fell, but adrenaline took over. I grabbed the first heavy object I could reach, a wooden statue from my shelf, and threw it with everything I had. It struck him across the forehead, and he stumbled back with a sharp cry, clutching his face. Max didn't hesitate. He chased the man all the way down the hallway, snapping at his legs as he backed toward the open door in a frantic shuffle. With a final desperate stagger, the man bolted down the stairs, disappearing from sight. Max stood at the doorway, barking after him with this proud, protective stance. When I finally pulled him inside and shut the door, the flat fell quiet, except for his ragged breathing. I sank onto the couch, shaking so hard my teeth clicked. Max trotted over, tail wagging just a little, like he knew he had done something important. I wrapped my arms around him and cried into his fur because the whole thing felt unreal, like my mind couldn't quite catch up. Eventually, I managed to pull myself together enough to call the police. They arrived quickly and took photos of the broken chain, listened carefully as I explained everything, and even knelt down to pet Max. One officer smiled and said he was a little hero, and I agreed with every bit of that. They later found the man not far from the building. He had a long record, and hearing that didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was how deliberate everything had been. The police told me they didn't think he chose my door randomly. They believed he had been watching the building or certain tenants for a while, waiting for a moment when someone was home alone. That thought haunted me long after. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the flat made my heart race, and the shadows felt wrong, too still, too stretched. Max stayed pressed against me the entire night, and whenever I reached out to feel his steady breathing, it calmed me just enough to keep going. Christmas came and went, but everything felt different. I didn't want my mom to tell anyone at dinner, because pretending everything was normal gave my mind a tiny break from the fear. But even during the laughter, I kept thinking about the door chain, the shove, the way his eyes changed. It made me realize how fragile safety can feel once it's been shaken. Still, the thing that stayed with me more than the fear was the gratitude. Max had protected me without hesitation. From that day forward, I gave him every treat, every walk, every bit of love he could possibly want, because he earned it in a way I will never be able to repay. And even now, years later, when winter wind howls around the corners of whatever home I am in, I still think about that knock at the door, about how close everything came to going wrong, and about the dog who refused to let it happen. It was the day before Christmas, and the store felt like absolute chaos, packed with last-minute shoppers racing through the aisles, with carts overflowing with wrapping paper, decorations, and whatever toys were still left on the shelves. Almost everything was gone, and people looked frantic, grabbing whatever they could find before someone else took it. I was in the toy section trying to find something for my niece, and the options were painfully scarce. Then I noticed one bright, colorful toy on the shelf, clearly the kind of thing kids were begging for that year, and there were only 2 left. At that exact moment, 2 parents reached for the same one, a man and a woman, their hands landing on it in the same second. Neither of them let go. They immediately started arguing, their voices cutting sharply through all the background noise of the store. People around us stopped and stared, because it escalated so fast that you could feel the tension ripple through the aisle. The man yanked the toy toward him, but the woman pulled back with just as much force, both of them glaring with this intense frustration that made their faces turn red. It was obvious neither was planning to back down. The man suddenly shoved the woman, and she stumbled but managed to stay on her feet, grabbing the toy again with this determined look in her eyes. That was when everything crossed into something worse. The man leaned in and bit her arm hard enough that she screamed and pulled back in shock. I saw red spreading down her sleeve where his teeth had broken the skin, and people around us gasped and stepped away, unsure what to do. Store employees rushed over while the woman clutched her arm, shaking, but unbelievably she still refused to let go of the toy. The man was breathing heavily, gripping the toy like his life depended on it, and for a second it looked like he might try to pull it away again. Then the distant sound of sirens started to grow louder. The man dropped the toy onto the floor, looked around with this strange blank expression, and just walked away as if nothing had happened at all. The woman bent down, picked up the toy and held it to her chest like it was the most important thing she owned. Police arrived moments later and talked to both of them. The man was taken away, still looking strangely calm, and the woman was given first aid. She looked pale, shaken, completely exhausted, but she refused to loosen her grip on that toy, even for a second. Slowly, the crowd that had gathered drifted away, and the store went back to a tense kind of quiet. People whispered to each other as they left that aisle, avoiding the spot where everything had unfolded. I left the store without buying anything, my hands empty but my mind spinning. I kept replaying the scene, wondering how something as simple as a toy could push two adults to that point. As I walked to my car, I thought about the child who would eventually open that gift, and whether they would ever know what their mom went through to bring it home. I hope they never do. The whole moment left this uneasy feeling in my chest that stayed with me long after I drove away. Last year on Christmas Eve, I was working late. I was 25, commuting every day from Washington on the train, and because I was one of the younger employees, I always got stuck with the shifts nobody else wanted. By the time I finally clocked out, it was already 5:30, and my family had left an hour earlier to head to my cousin's house. I drove home alone, grabbed a quick snack, then got back in my car and put my cousin's address into my phone. Halfway through the drive, snow started falling, and by the time I pulled into their neighborhood around 6:45, it had turned into a full storm. I rushed inside with my gifts and joined everyone just as they were starting dinner. It was warm and loud and full of the kind of holiday comfort that makes you forget how long the day has been. I stayed until about 11. Most of my family had already left, but I lingered a little longer, just talking and soaking in the last bit of Christmas Eve energy before heading back out into the cold. The moment I stepped outside, I realized how bad things had gotten. The snow on the ground was already close to 2 feet and still coming down hard. The roads on the way home were barely plowed. I had to crawl under 20 miles per hour because even the slightest turn felt risky. Everything was silent. Every store was dark. Every street was empty. It looked like a ghost town swallowed by winter. Then I saw flashing red taillights ahead of me. A single car was pulled over on the side of the road with exhaust drifting upward, tinted red by the lights. As I got closer, I noticed someone standing beside it waving their arm. I assumed their car had stalled or gotten stuck, and because there was no one else around, I pulled over behind them. The second I stepped out, the man hurried toward me like he had been waiting for anyone to stop. He was average height, bundled up, and spoke quickly as he asked if I knew anything about fixing engines. I told him honestly that I was not great with cars. He responded immediately, saying it was fine, and ducked into his vehicle. He opened his trunk and told me to wait near it for a moment while he checked something under the hood. I did not understand what he needed, but with the wind howling and snow whipping across the road, I just tried to listen. The trunk was blocking my view of what he was doing, and the storm drowned out every small noise. I leaned forward slightly, trying to figure out how I could even help. Then I heard fast footsteps in the snow behind me, and before I could turn around, I felt myself pushed forward into the open trunk. The man tried to shut it, but I managed to brace myself and push back with everything I had. I slipped out and reached for my keys on instinct. When he tried to grab me again, I swung my arm and used my key to defend myself. It startled him enough that he stumbled back, and I used that tiny moment to sprint to my car. My hands were shaking, but I locked my doors, started the engine, and sped off down the empty street. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the man had fallen to his knees in the snow, and the cold, silent road behind me felt darker than before. A little farther down, I called 911 and told them everything. 10 minutes later, I saw blue and red lights reflecting on the windows of dark storefronts. Officers were already with the man and had called for medical assistance. I sat in my car watching, still shaking from the shock of what almost happened. I made it home half an hour later and told my family the whole story. That Christmas, I could not stop thinking about how quickly something peaceful can turn into something deeply unsettling. It remains one of the most frightening experiences of my life. Last year on Christmas Eve, I was working late. I was 25, commuting every day from Washington on the train, and because I was one of the younger employees, I always got stuck with the shifts nobody else wanted. By the time I finally clocked out, it was already 5:30, and my family had left an hour earlier to head to my cousin's house. I drove home alone, grabbed a quick snack, then got back in my car and put my cousin's address into my phone. Halfway through the drive, snow started falling, and by the time I pulled into their neighborhood around 6:45, it had turned into a full storm. I rushed inside with my gifts and joined everyone just as they were starting dinner. It was warm and loud and full of the kind of holiday comfort that makes you forget how long the day has been. I stayed until about 11. Most of my family had already left, but I lingered a little longer, just talking and soaking in the last bit of Christmas Eve energy before heading back out into the cold. The moment I stepped outside, I realized how bad things had gotten. The snow on the ground was already close to 2 feet and still coming down hard. The roads on the way home were barely plowed. I had to crawl under 20 miles per hour because even the slightest turn felt risky. Everything was silent. Every store was dark. Every street was empty. It looked like a ghost town swallowed by winter. Then I saw flashing red taillights ahead of me. A single car was pulled over on the side of the road with exhaust drifting upward, tinted red by the lights. As I got closer, I noticed someone standing beside it waving their arm. I assumed their car had stalled or gotten stuck, and because there was no one else around, I pulled over behind them. The second I stepped out, the man hurried toward me, like he had been waiting for anyone to stop. He was average height, bundled up, and spoke quickly as he asked if I knew anything about fixing engines. I told him honestly that I was not great with cars. He responded immediately, saying it was fine, and ducked into his vehicle. It was Christmas Eve 2011, and I was 20 years old working a closing shift at CVS, which was pretty much the last thing I wanted to do that night. I had begged to switch, but no one else wanted the shift, so I ended up being the only employee in the building until midnight. The store was 5 miles from my house on a quiet corner at the end of a dead street, and during the day it had enough customers to stay in business, but past 8, it was rare to see anyone at all. On Christmas Eve night, I assumed I would get maybe 1 or 2 customers before closing. My shift started at 4, and the first few hours were surprisingly busy. After 8, the store emptied fast, and by 10, when the pharmacy closed, I was officially alone. I was annoyed because I had a crush on the girl working the pharmacy, and we had been talking during the slow hours. Now I was stuck up front by myself, and the store felt way too quiet. By 11, I had only rung up one customer in almost an hour, and I was counting the minutes until midnight. That was when I heard this faint tapping on the front window. It did not sound intentional, more like someone's zipper brushing against the glass. I turned toward the window and saw a man standing out there wearing a heavy coat with the hood up, baggy jeans and black boots. He was staring directly at me. After he realized I noticed him, he walked to the entrance and came inside. He did not say anything, just stared at me while walking past and disappearing down one of the aisles. 5 minutes later, the tapping started again, only this time it was coming from inside the store. I leaned right to look down the aisle but did not see anyone. The tapping kept going, steady and deliberate, like someone wanted me to notice but did not want to reveal themselves yet. I felt a sudden urge to use the bathroom, but I was not allowed to go when a customer was in the store, especially since I was alone. Another 10 minutes passed, and although I never saw the man, I kept hearing odd little sounds coming from different aisles. It finally pushed me to the point where I stepped out from behind the counter and called out, "Excuse me." The store echoed with my voice, but no one answered. I walked through the aisles searching for him, but he was nowhere. Every aisle I entered, I heard noises coming from the one next to it, like he was always one step ahead. In the candy aisle, I heard sleigh bells jingling on the other side of the shelf, like someone was shaking them on purpose. I leaned down trying to peek through the tiny shelf holes, and what I saw made my stomach drop. A pair of eyes were staring back at me from the other side of the shelf. They slid out of sight, and then the tall man stepped into the aisle with me. He was making these strange sounds, almost childish, and it sent a chill straight through me. He started moving toward me in this bizarre tiptoe hopping motion, and no matter how silly it sounds, it was deeply unsettling. I backed up fast while he followed me with that off-putting little hop until I reached the front of the store. When I looked back again, he was standing completely still at the end of the aisle, about 20 feet away. His goofy expression twisted into something colder and sharper, and in that instant, something in me snapped. I walked straight out the front door, thinking distance was the only thing that mattered. But the moment I stepped outside, he started running at me with full speed. I ran around the side of the building, too scared to risk opening my car door because I knew he would catch up before I locked it. I sprinted to the back and slipped through the employee entrance, which was, thankfully, still unlocked. I shut it hard and locked it, then ran to the front of the store to lock the main doors too. That was when I grabbed the phone and called my manager, who was somehow still awake. While I was talking to him, I heard it again, that tapping noise coming from inside the store. It felt like every nerve in my body went cold. I dropped the phone on the counter and bolted out the back door again. I was in my car and driving home within 20 seconds. I called my manager again once I got home, and he called the police. They checked the store later, and as far as I heard, nothing was missing. My manager was not thrilled that I left the store, but honestly, I did not care. I never went back, and I spent Christmas Day trying to act normal, even though every time the house made a noise, I kept thinking about those eyes staring at me through the shelf and the sound of footsteps chasing me into the dark. Ireland has always been my home, and I truly love it. But anyone who has lived here knows it is a place layered with old history and strange energy, and people grow up hearing stories about shadows on the road at night, or voices on the wind, or old houses that hold memories no one wants to speak about. So when my granddad told me a story one Christmas evening, I understood why he had stayed silent for so long. He grew up in a tiny village called Kilmula, a place tucked between a forested hill and a narrow river. But by the time I was born, Kilmula was already abandoned, the buildings sinking into the earth, the roads cracked and overgrown, and not even marked on most maps. My family always thought he had left simply because of work opportunities, but one night in my late 20s, he told us the real reason, and the room went quiet. He said Kilmula was a place where too many heavy things had happened, and people simply stopped speaking about them as if silence could bury the past. My granddad spoke about winters that felt colder than they should have been, and about the way neighbors sometimes went missing or became sick without explanation, and how the older men in the village warned kids never to wander into the woods at night because the trees there were said to hold old memories. Most people brushed these stories off as superstition, but then he told us about the night everything changed, the night the village lost almost everyone it cared about. Every year, the Flaherty family, who owned a modest farm and a small whiskey workshop, hosted a Christmas gathering. They were not wealthy, but they were warm people known for their generosity, and their house sat right along the river with a big open room where neighbors crowded together to celebrate the holiday. They would bring small gifts, share food and stories, and let the music carry them late into the night. That year, people needed the joy more than ever because money was tight, and tensions between groups moving through the area had made the village anxious. As Christmas approached, people were excited for the Flaherty celebration, but one morning a strange note appeared on their door, warning them not to hold the gathering. No one knew who wrote it or what exactly it meant. The handwriting was messy, almost rushed, and the message felt heavy, even though the words were vague. But Joseph, the head of the family, insisted it was just someone trying to spoil the fun, and everyone continued preparing for the party. Neighbors talked about outfits, recipes, and music, and the younger people teased each other about who they hoped to dance with. My granddad said he was too young to attend, but his older brother had been counting the days all month because a girl he liked from a nearby town was going to be there. When the night arrived, people dressed in their best and walked through the cold toward the farmhouse. The river shimmered in the moonlight, and the sky looked clear and quiet. From inside the house came the sound of music and laughter, and it seemed for a little while that nothing bad could touch them. The party lasted late into the night, and no one worried because the Flaherty family always opened their doors to anyone who needed a place to sleep until morning. The winter was harsh, and walking home in the dark was difficult, so many simply stayed by the fire or found a corner to rest. Everything felt warm, calm, and safe. But by the next afternoon, something was terribly wrong. No one from the celebration had returned home. People tried not to panic at first, assuming everyone had simply overslept or decided to help clean, but as more hours passed, the uneasiness spread through the village until finally a group of men decided to walk to the farmhouse to check on everyone. My granddad said he remembered standing at the window watching them cross the fields and disappear into the trees, and when they came back, their faces were pale and frightened. They said something terrible had happened inside the Flaherty house, something no one could immediately explain. The details were softened when my granddad told us, but we understood that many people had been found unresponsive, and the house was in complete chaos, with furniture moved and the air thick with something cold and unsettling. Whatever had happened inside seemed deliberate and carefully planned. The only clue was another note left on the Flaherty door with the simple words, "We warned them," written across it. After that morning, the village changed forever. Families who had lost loved ones were shaken to their core, and people spoke in whispers trying to make sense of something that had no clear explanation. Some blamed tension between different groups passing through the area. Others thought it was connected to older conflicts, and a few quietly whispered that Kilmula itself was touched by something strange that drew misfortune to anyone who stayed too long. The police searched for answers all winter, following footprints to the river where they disappeared, then questioning every nearby settlement, but the trail slipped away and no one was ever charged. The grief in the community was heavy, and my granddad said his own mother never fully recovered after learning what had happened to her oldest son, who had simply gone out to dance on Christmas and never came home. Soon after, the family packed their belongings and left Kilmula behind, hoping distance would help them heal. But my granddad always believed the land itself held memories that would not rest. He told us that the silence that settled over the empty village afterward felt too deep, not just the absence of people, but the absence of something else, something that had been there watching. As the years passed, the houses fell apart, and nature took over, and eventually Kilmula vanished from the maps. He never spoke more about the other strange events he hinted at, and we never pushed him out of respect for the pain he still carried. Sometimes I wish I had asked for more details, but another part of me is relieved, because some stories feel too heavy to hear all at once. When I think back on that night, when he finally told us why he believed Kilmula was better left forgotten, I understand that some places hold shadows longer than people realize, and some memories are kept quiet, not because people do not want to remember, but because remembering them makes the world feel different, colder. And every Christmas when the wind rattles the windows and the sky feels too still, I think about that abandoned village on the forested hill and the stories buried there, and I believe my granddad when he said Kilmula was a place where certain things were better left unspoken. It was Christmas Eve of 1988 when the quiet town of Ethel, Washington, slipped from a picture-perfect holiday scene into something far darker and unforgettable. And even now, decades later, the story still circulates every December, whispered in the same uneasy tone as if speaking it too loudly might wake something sleeping beneath the surface. Because what happened to Ed and Min Morin was the kind of tragedy that small towns never fully recover from. Ed was 81, and Min was 83 gentle, honest, hardworking people who had lived in Lewis County their entire lives. The kind of couple who knew everyone and treated everyone with the same patient kindness. Their days were simple, tending their small farm, visiting friends, attending church, and looking forward to Christmas the same way they had for more than 50 years. No one imagined anything unusual could ever happen to them, let alone something that would shake the entire region. That week before Christmas, their family began noticing odd signs. Nothing dramatic, just small things that felt off. Their green Chrysler Newport was suddenly missing from the driveway, and when relatives stopped by the house, they found everything neatly in place, except there was no sign of either Ed or Min. A strange phone message had been left for their son, a message that felt wrong but not alarming enough to immediately declare something dangerous. The family kept calling the house, but no one picked up. Neighbors reported seeing the couple earlier that morning, but after that they seemed to have vanished, which pushed the family to contact the Lewis County Sheriff's Office, hoping for answers. The search grew fast and tense, but by Christmas Eve, the fear everyone tried to suppress became real. Their car was found abandoned and stained inside, and later that day the couple themselves were found in a remote, wooded area, far from home, unresponsive, and clearly victims of a terrible crime. Investigators realized quickly this was no random event. The house had not been forced open, nothing was vandalized, nothing stolen inside, which meant the couple had likely been approached by someone they trusted, or at least someone who knew how to manipulate them for their own gain. The most alarming detail was a bank withdrawal earlier the same day, showing nearly $9,000 removed under circumstances that were clearly not voluntary. Indications suggested the Morins had been coerced into leaving home and traveling to the bank with dangerous individuals who knew exactly what they wanted. Investigators were overwhelmed by the lack of solid evidence. There were no cameras, the witness descriptions were inconsistent, and the trail went cold fast. People in Ethel gathered for vigils, grieving the loss of two of the kindest souls in their community. But the fear beneath the grief was what unsettled everyone. The idea that someone capable of harming an elderly couple could walk among them, disappear, and leave no trace. Families locked their doors for the first time in years. Neighbors kept lights on through the night. Children were not allowed outside alone, and an invisible cloud of dread settled over Lewis County, which lingered long after the Christmas decorations came down. For years, detectives chased leads that went nowhere until suspicions started circling around two local brothers, Rick and John R., known troublemakers whose behavior over the years had drawn quiet caution from neighbors, but nothing concrete linked them to the Morin case, at least not then. The investigation rested in a drawer for nearly 30 years until advances in forensic tools reopened the file in 2012, matching new information with old evidence and witness statements that suddenly lined up in a way they had not before. People who had stayed silent finally spoke, and investigators pieced together a pattern that pointed straight at the R brothers, including testimony from individuals who recalled hearing one of them bragging about being involved in something connected to the Morins. The financial motive, the abandoned car, the bank withdrawal, the timeline, everything fit in a way that detectives could no longer ignore. Rick R. was arrested, tried, and ultimately convicted in 2013 on charges tied to what investigators concluded was a targeted attack, driven by greed and the desire to leave no witnesses. The prosecution presented more than 100 witnesses, painting a picture of two individuals who had intentionally sought out the Morins as easy targets and carried out a plan with chilling determination. While the defense tried to claim the evidence was too old or too circumstantial, the jury disagreed. Rick R. was sentenced to life in prison without parole, and though justice finally arrived, it did not erase the heartbreak the community felt. The Morin family said it gave them closure but not peace. Nothing could replace the gentle, steady presence of Ed and Min, who had spent their lives spreading kindness in a community that adored them. Today, nearly 40 years later, their story remains a reminder of how even the most peaceful places can hide moments of deep darkness. Every Christmas, someone lays a wreath on their graves, a symbol of love and remembrance, and a promise that their memory endures far beyond the tragedy that took them that winter night. Their lives, gentle, humble, and generous, continue to inspire the people of Lewis County, reminding everyone that kindness leaves a mark that even tragedy cannot erase. It was a cold December morning in 1996 when the quiet routine of Alexandria, Virginia took an unexpected turn after a cemetery groundskeeper made a discovery that would unsettle the entire community for decades to come. Because lying between the headstones in Pleasant Valley Memorial Park was a woman who appeared peaceful at first glance. Yet everything about the scene hinted that something was deeply wrong. Beside her stood a small artificial Christmas tree decorated with gold ribbons, like someone had placed it there with intention, and to this day people remember her only as the Christmas tree lady. She had been found on December 18th reclined on a plastic sheet, with her head resting on a clear bag filled with shredded green and white tinsel. Her clothes were neat and ordinary: a blue trench coat, a sweater, slacks, clean shoes. Nothing unusual except for how deliberate everything looked. Near her were a few juice bottles, a small cassette player with classical music tapes, and the tree standing quietly beside her. What shocked investigators most was the lack of any visible signs of struggle or disruption around her, as if she had simply lain down in that exact place on purpose. The medical examiner later concluded that her passing was caused by a mixture of alcohol and over-the-counter medication. But that explanation only deepened the mystery, because the bigger question was not how she died, but why she was there in the first place, and who, if anyone, might have been involved. She carried no identification, no wallet, no personal photos, nothing that could tell police who she was. Her fingerprints were not in any national database, and her dental records matched no missing person reports. She seemed to appear from nowhere and vanished the moment she was found, leaving behind only questions. Investigators estimated she was between 50 and 70 years old, with soft auburn hair and glasses, and that her clothing suggested she came from a stable middle-class life. But if that was true, then why had no one reported her missing, And why had no one come forward in the days, weeks, and years that followed? Among her belongings, officers found a note written in calm, steady handwriting that said, "Deceased prefer no examination. Please arrange cremation with funds provided. Thank you, Jane Doe." Attached to it was a $50 bill. The message was polite, almost formal, yet the intention behind it felt heavy. It made people wonder whether someone else had prepared that note, or whether it was hers, and if it was hers, what had led her to such a lonely moment in a winter cemetery, and why leave a Christmas tree next to her? Investigators searched burial records for any possible family connection, but found none. The cemetery had no link to her, no relatives inside its gates, nothing that tied her to the land. Some people believed she might have been grieving someone she had lost. Others thought she may have been quietly struggling, someone who felt unseen during a season that can amplify loneliness. Yet her neat appearance seemed to contradict the idea that she had nowhere else to go. The tree remained the strangest part because it felt symbolic, almost personal, standing upright beside her like a quiet message. Some speculated it represented a longing for comfort, or a memory she refused to let go of. Others believed it was meant to mark the holiday to make sure no one misunderstood the timing of her final moments. For investigators, it was one of the most puzzling details, because it created emotion without offering answers. Police followed every lead they could, examining missing person cases from neighboring states, circulating sketches, talking to the media, releasing descriptions, and even having the tapes analyzed, hoping the music might hold a clue. But nobody recognized her face, nobody claimed her belongings, and nobody ever said she might be theirs. As technology improved, detectives hoped that new tools like genetic genealogy might reveal her name, but so far nothing has surfaced, and the case remains one of the most quietly heartbreaking mysteries from the 90s. People now refer to her as the Christmas Tree Lady, a name that feels gentle but also sad, because it reminds everyone how her final moments were spent alone in a cold cemetery during a season meant for warm lights, full tables, and families together. Her story has sparked countless theories discussed in online forums, documentaries, and podcasts, but every idea ends in the same place: the truth remains locked away. Nearly 30 years later, her presence still lingers in Alexandria, a reminder that behind every quiet face in a crowd, there can be private battles no one sees, especially during the holidays, when the weight of the season can feel heavier for some than others. And even though the mystery has never been solved, people still hope that a distant memory, a forgotten connection, or a new technology might one day reveal who she was and why she chose that quiet winter morning. Until then, she remains a haunting holiday legend, a solemn figure wrapped in silence, shadows, and the gold ribbons of a lonely Christmas tree.